that comes out of an educational process. How many of you guys ever heard your parents talk about how they wish they would have gotten to have more education, or they wish they could go back to school, or they wish that they could keep learning stuff, right? That you guys have opportunities they wish they had. You ever heard your parents talk about that? Well, what's going to come of this is, as education is going to be stressed for smaller kids, what results from this educational movement in the mid-19th century is also adults are interested in educating themselves. And there becomes something called the Lyceum movement, or the Lyceum. And these are traveling lecturers and traveling scientists, traveling different people who go to small towns, oftentimes like town halls and stuff, and they will talk. You literally might be at a small town in New Hampshire, and Ralph Waldo Emerson might come and speak or read, right? Or a scientist might come and talk about some new discoveries. Or you might have a transcendentalist author show up. Or you might have somebody come and talk about, botany or something. People are traveling all around the country, and especially the Northeast, educating little cities about stuff, right? Because people want to be educated. Sort of like, remember I took some of you guys to Transy to that GT thing, right? That was kind of a Lyceum, right? You go, you hear a lecture. After the lecture, right, you think about stuff, right? It's an issue, you can talk about it, right? I know on the bus ride home, Andrew and Pierce and Miles had a huge discussion on race and journalism and all kinds of stuff, and that's what the whole purpose was, right? When you hear people talk about issues, it's so you can think about these issues and come to your own conclusions. That's what Lyceum is starting to do. All of this comes out of a push for more education, and all of this comes out of the Second Great Awakening. Another movement that's coming from Europe is an anti-war movement. The American Peace Society is an organization that's trying to promote pacifism and wipe out war. This is pre-Civil War. That is pre-Mexican War. That wars are inherently and morally wrong. They're not justifiable. They break up society. They hurt children. They hurt women. They hurt men. They hurt families. And this, again, is coming from the moral reforms from the Second Great Awakening. All right. We're getting a little bit further into this. Dorothea Dix. We talked about mentally ill. Dorothea Dix was a journalist, and she was a writer, and she went around all around the country, and she wrote about the conditions of the mentally handicapped. And what she found, she would find these places where the mentally handicapped, she'd go down into like crappy, like wet, damp, mildewy basements where people who were mentally handicapped would be in cages chained up to walls with feces all over the place, and they were just given slop food. And because remember, a long time before this, if you were mentally handicapped, it was a burden to your family, right? And you were sort of discarded. Sometimes it was even like, you thought maybe God was judging you, or God had judged them, right? I mean, biblically, right? That was like what lepers, right? They were judged, and that's how they felt, and they were pushed out of cities. And so the Second Great Awakening is taking that and questioning that idea, right? If we want to make the world better on earth, then we need to treat everyone, including the weakest people, as good as we can. Dorothea Dix was part of this, wrote about it, and then we started to see some changes in how mentally handicapped people are cared for. And today, mentally handicapped people have a much easier time, obviously, than they did 100 years ago, but we're still always trying to do better, right? How can we integrate handicapped people into society more easily? There are now parks for physically handicapped people, so they can actually, little kids who have physical handicaps can actually play with able-bodied children in a really flowing way. They're starting to have these all over the country slowly, so kids who are in wheelchairs can actually be on the park and they can play together, and there's no real seen as differences, and it's pretty great. They're very expensive, but they're having it specifically out west. Okay, are there any questions on women's rights stuff, the peace stuff, the education stuff? Have you noticed that up until this time we've kind of just been talking about like economic stuff or political stuff, right? Wars or elections or leaders or bank stuff. What's different about this? This is social stuff, right? This is the stuff that you guys oftentimes care about, though. If I was to ask you what makes you a conservative or liberal, it tends to be social stuff. none of you guys pay taxes, right? You guys, or very few of you do, right? You guys don't have big, strong opinions on the Federal Reserve, probably. But so things like gay marriage or abortion, right, the death penalty type of stuff, you guys probably do have opinions on those things. Those are more social issues, and those tend to hit you guys a little bit more to heart. Which leads us to the thing that I think is the coolest. This is like our first hippies. What comes out of the Second Awakening also is groups of people start to form wilderness utopias. They start to form cities where they want to live the life of their utopian ideas. Some of them are really weird, and some of them are just kind of sweet. Some of them are tragic. A guy named Robert Owen was actually an industrialist from Scotland, and he started a wilderness utopia in 1825 in a city called, he founded a new city in Indiana called New Harmony. New Harmony, Indiana. It was a utopia where many people, do what?
What was his name?
Robert Owens. It won't be in the test, but Robert Owens starts this utopia. I think it was over 1,000 people. They had the first ever free kindergarten for children in America. They had the first ever free public library. Equality amongst people. They lived, sort of communally. Communal living. Everyone's equal. High education. How do we see that? Is that good or bad?
Both. Both.
That's communism, Michaela.
That's actually.
All right, Michaela's a commie.
Oh,
Everyone judge Michaela. Your father, this is on tape. Your father is going to judge you now, Michaela.
Do you want to get rid of the guns?
Backwards is the book I'm reading.
It's a
the main-
utopia.
Yeah, the main topic.
In fact, if you want to read a really good book, St. Thomas More wrote a book called Utopia. And it's kind of like a 16th century or 16th century version of what he thought utopia should be like, although there's a little bit of racism thrown in there. The next one I want to talk about is Brook Farm. This was in Massachusetts, Brook Farm was. These were 20 pretty impressive intellectuals who lived very, very plainly. Your boy Nathaniel Hawthorne was one of these people. They called it plain living and high thinking and plain living. They lived communally, they read, they composed, they lived off the land. Everyone was equal. You made for yourself and for others. You didn't have more than you needed. And then their barn burned down and they all had to go away. But this was for a couple of years they lived on this commune. Have you ever heard of a term like a hippie commune? Where everyone goes and lives and sort of is earthy and stuff. They're not as popular, obviously they're not popular at all anymore, but like in the 60s, communes became kind of a thing. Now like weird religious, like Branch Davidians type have like scary communes and compounds and stuff. But for a long time it was just like people who wanted to live and be, right? Rejecting social norms and casting off the racism of our society. And then let's go down to Shakers before I get to the Oneida community. Shakers actually lasted until about 1940. Shakers believed in absolute, like they were communistic. They had about 20 communities around the country for a while, but one of the problems for Shakers, they had communistic living, men and women are completely equal. But everyone was celibate. What's the problem if you have communities and everyone is celibate and no one gets married?
Children.
Not a lot of children. They had to be based completely on, they had to, I don't know if they call it evangelize, but they would adopt kids and make them into Shakers, right? Okay, the Oneida community is a little more radical. This isn't. Have you ever heard of like Oneida like dishes, like silverware and dishes, Oneida plates and stuff? That's where this comes from. Yes.
Was the Shakers the ones that did the weird dances?
Yeah, they got their name Shakers for how they danced. Yeah. Yeah. The Oneida community. This is upstate New York, Burnt-Over district. This lasted for about 20 years or more. They believed in complete equality of the genders. But they also believed in the practice of free love. It was called complex marriage. Everyone's kind of married to everyone.
I think this is in the book. It sounds familiar.
Yeah.
But not everyone got to have kids. They practiced birth control except certain people were allowed to have kids and other people weren't allowed to have kids. Complex marriage, complex social arrangement. Certain people could have kids, certain people couldn't have kids. And they were able to finance their community because they made plates, and they were really good at making plates and spoons and forks and stuff, and they sold them. So when you get Oneida, like dishes and stuff, that's where it comes from originally. This finally broke up after about 25 or 30 years.
What was their base?
And they started practicing monogamy, and everybody else could have their own kids. What was their basis for this?
For like their decision, like how would they like?
I don't know. I'm assuming that if you had like big ears and red hair and braces, you probably were considered superior. And I don't know. I don't know how they decided.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you could read about it. It was just, they are rejecting social norm. In 1848, if you live in a group and all the boys are married to all the girls, that's not normal, right? That's not normal in 2013. In 1848, that's really not normal. What do you think about that? Uncomfortable? If you thought my conversation before was uncomfortable, this one's uncomfortable.
For everyone.
So if you live in a community, you are inherently married to all the girls. Or girls, you're married to all the boys. Free love.
It's more just
Please pardon the interruption for afternoon announcement.
That is our utopian communities.
Wednesday,